everybody, to another edition of the Replacement Level Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Phillips. I'll be going solo today. My colleague, Rafal Negulwinski, is on vacation, and so it'll just be me. So you all are welcome to this extraordinary, great episode that we're going to have today here. We got a lot to go over today. It is just a few days before the All-Star break officially happens, so therefore just a few days before All-Star festivities. They're going to be going on in Seattle, up in the Pacific Northwest. T-Mobile Park is going to be hosting them this year. It should be another fantastic All-Star break again this season. So this week we're going to go over the replacement level players, as we always do, but this time we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to do All-Star editions. So that means we're going to look at the All-Star roster and pick out guys who've currently made it and decide which ones should still be worth it and which ones are worthy of replacement. And yes, we are including the players that have already replaced injured players or guys who are not going to be participating this year. So it is going to be a little bit more challenging because we'd easily pick those guys, but we stay away from that this time. And then we're also going to talk about the All-Star players who are currently leading baseball in a variety of categories. So basically these players are selected the All-Stars, and we're going to kind of see who are category leaders and then how many are going to be represented both in the AL and NL, and should be making for a great episode. So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. So first up, we've got the All-Star leaders. So again, looking at the All-Star roster, it is a who's who of Major League Baseball players that are having fantastic seasons. There have been a few guys that have been nominated for the All-Star game that are no longer going to be participating. Again, it's either because of injury or they've chosen not to because they're working their way back from an injury. So, for example, Wander Franco of the Tampa Bay Rays is replacing Aaron Judge, who's still out with injury. Kyle Tucker is going to replace his teammate is going to replace Mike Trout, who just broke his wrist. Mariners center fielder and face of MLB and franchise player Julio Rodriguez is going to be replacing Yordan Alvarez. Also, George Kirby will be replacing the Tampa Bay Rays' Shane McClanahan. And then for the NL, you've got Pirates closer David Bednar, who's going to be replacing the great and future Hall of Famer Clayton Kershaw. So those are some of the replacements that have already been made, but looking at the rosters that we have going into this year's All-Star game, it is a who's who of the most recognizable players that are going to be in the game and participating. So it should make for a very fun All-Star game. I do have to say, in looking at the rosters, the American League seems a little bit light in kind of, I don't know if it's just necessarily like star power or actual productivity, but just, there are names that are on there that are absolutely worthy of being all-stars. They're having fantastic seasons like Jonah Heim, Yandy Diaz. But then you look at the bench and you've got Salvador Perez, who's coming off the bench, Vladimir Guerrero, who's also coming off the bench. And granted, it is an accomplishment to be named a all-star. It's also an accomplishment to be named a starter. And again, not taking anything away from Jonah Heim and Yandy Diaz and really just those two guys. It's just kind of surprising that those are your starters and not some of the guys that we've seen in the past. It is nice to see that we're getting some new blood coming in to the All-Star game, being represented. And, that is always nice to see. Just, again, looking at the rosters, it is a little interesting to see how it shook out. Looking at the roster, again, there's not really any glaring player where you're like, ooh, that guy made it. Okay, he's probably making it just because he is that team's lone representative. But we'll talk more about it when we get into replacement players. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here. But if you look at the AL roster and compare it, specifically the hitters, compare it to the NL, it does seem, just a little bit light. Like the starters for the NL: Sean Murphy, Freddie Freeman, Luis Urias, Nolan Arenado, Orlando Arcia, Ronald Acuna Jr., Mookie Betts, Corbin Carroll, and JD Martinez. Like, those are guys you can obviously tell by listening to their names and think, the first image comes to your head like, yeah, that dude's an all-star. He's going to be great. Guys like Corbin McCarroll, who are rookies, who are going to be in their first all-star and they're a starter, there's going to be more from him. I mean, get used to his name, get used to seeing him a lot. The guy is legit. He is a big reason as to why the Arizona Diamondbacks are being productive. There are other reasons like Ketel Marte, and then you've also got Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Zach Gallen. So, yes, the Diamondbacks are on the rise. A lot of people weren't expecting them, but they are on the rise. But it's going to make for a fun second half of the season. Again, we're closing in on the first half. We're getting ready to enjoy the All-Star break with the Home Run Derby, which should be another exciting derby. I gotta say, I'm a little disappointed that Julio Rodriguez is going to be going against Pete Alonso in the first round. I really would have liked to seen those two match up, potentially in the finals or in a later round. But at the same time, getting to see them in round one, it's going to be fun. I'm sad because one of those guys is going to be going home. Julio was the runner-up last year to Juan Soto, who is not participating. So I am disappointed that Soto is not going to be participating again this year, defending his title. But I understand, if you don't want to do it because you've got a lot going on, you just want some time to rest, whatever the case may be. It's their choice, so I'm not going to be too hung up about it. It is disappointing to see that the reigning champ will not be defending his title, but it is his decision. Pete Alonso is a previous winner, and you got to expect him to have a good shot at winning again this year. So Julio has his work cut out for him in round one, as does Pete Alonso. I mean, Julio is no slouch. He's not going to be a pushover. So that should be making for a great round one matchup. We'll see how the rest of the Derby breaks down. For those who are betting out there, take your picks, make them. Let's see who you've got. Love to hear back who your choices are for winning the Home Run Derby, who the choices are winning for the All-Star game. Share with those in the comments. Tweet at us. We'd love to get some interaction from our fans. Love to hear from you guys, hear your voices. It just makes everything better. I'm going to stick with Julio Rodriguez as the Derby winner. I think he's going to come through. I think he's just going to make it happen. I mean, I can't really say anything as to why. He hasn't had a great season, but I just think he's going to be charged up playing in his home park. So I think the fans will give him an extra boost and help him get through it, and I can see him winning it. And just, again, drawing more comparisons to the great Ken Griffey Jr. So that's my pick. I think for All-Star Game predictions, I think I'm going to go NL. I just like their overall roster and their team's makeup, who they've got. The thing is with the NL, they don't have a lot of players who are not participating because of injury or anything like that. Like Clayton Kershaw is the only guy who's named an All-Star who's not going to be in the game. So I think that is going to be a big addition because everybody the NL has is absolutely worthy of it. Not that the AL players are not worthy of it, but there isn't this replacement that's come in to fill the void of somebody who is out with an injury. So I'm going to take the NL and I'm going to take Julio Rodriguez. But again, going back to our, one of the topics we're going to talk about in today's show, the All-Star stat leaders. So for the AL, we've got, no surprise, Shohei Ohtani is one of them, and the dude is like leading, I don't know, like eight different categories in all of Major League Baseball, not to mention just in the AL as well. So he's one of the guys that's going to be your stat leaders. Marcus Semien is another. Adolis Garcia, Jose Ramirez, Julio Rodriguez, and it's not for what you would think. And again, I will tease that because we'll get to that here later on. Garrett Cole, Shane McClanahan, George Kirby, Nathan Eovaldi, Sonny Gray, Kevin Gossman, and then Yennier Cano. So you've got 12 guys on the AL side who are leading all of baseball in a variety of different categories. For the NL, you've only got 7, but it is a nice list. It's Bryce Elder, Luis Arraez, no surprise there, so what category he's going to be leading in. Ronald Acuna Jr., who is, I would say, the NL's best chance at being their Shohei Ohtani in terms of Acuna is leading MLB in a variety of different categories as well. Freddie Freeman, Juan Soto, Spencer Strider, and then Camilo Doval as well. So it is kind of nice to see of all the all-star rosters, you've got a total of 19 guys who are also stat category leaders. A lot of them are leading in multiple categories. So it just backs up their claim, their status as being an all-star on there. And there are other ones that are on the all-star roster who didn't make it, but again, they're having great seasons. And then also, if you look at who they would be competing against for being on the roster, they're doing better. So there's always a lot of debate when it comes to the All-Star, who should be in, who should not be in, who was the biggest snub, which makes for a lot of great conversation with anybody. I will say, looking at the rosters that they have here, and then obviously getting into the replacement level players, it's very difficult to pick a guy on the roster and say, yeah, that dude doesn't belong. I mean, all these guys are very much worthy. They're having great seasons. Even looking at guys that who you could think of that could replacing them, like they have a case to be made for sure. But then, like, you can see why the person that is on the All-Star roster is on there. So it was tough making my picks for the replacement level players. There's no really easy choice. Well, I take that back. For the AL, there were a couple easy choices here. For the NL, it was a little bit more challenging. Again, AL or the NL guys, it's just who else are you picking? I mean, you can think of Xander Bogaerts, but he's having a down year. Fernando Tatis, he's having a down year. Manny Machado having a down year. Like, those are some dudes who have been previous all-star candidates, and they're just not doing what they normally do, what we all expect them to do. And there's no reason to put them in over anybody else that's currently on the roster. For the AL, who are some guys like Garrett Cole? Obviously, he's in, and he makes a lot of sense. A lot of people were probably thinking Carlos Rodon would be a guy that would be in there, but he's still out with an injury. You look at the White Sox and their kind of star-studded rotation, and Lucas Giolito is having a good year. Obviously, you could have a case to be made in there, but at the same time, like, who's the guy that you're going to take out to put him in over? Because he's not having like an all-star level like caliber year when you look at some of the other guys that are already on the all-star roster and guys who've replaced them. So it's really, I don't think there is a lot of players that you can gripe about and saying this was a snub, this player was a snub, and it was like hands down a big snub. Why didn't they have him in there? Anything like that. Like, I don't see that on this year's roster. There's a lot of guys who've made it, and there's not a lot of guys that are left on the outside looking in that you can point to and say that dude should be in. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, share with us in the comments. Share with us on Twitter. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why you think somebody else is a bigger snub and why I'm overlooking them and not giving them the credit they're due. So let's get into this week's edition of the replacement level players. Again, like I said, there was not a lot of easy choices to be made outside of the AL, and we'll get to it. And but it's just, again, guys that are in the All-Star game this year, guys who replaced players, they have a case to be made for sure. If it was me, these are the choices I would have made instead of the ones that were made. But I don't have any real say. I don't have any real power in who goes to the All-Star or anything like that. So for me, we're going to start it off. We're going to stick with the All-Star game host. And we're going to stick with George Kirby as my AL pitcher. He is having a fantastic year. Again, very much worthy of being an all-star. He's logged 101 innings. He's won 7 games. Got a complete game in there as well, which you don't see a lot anymore these days. Only given up 11 home runs in those 101 innings. Walked just 9 batters. 9 out of 101 innings. This dude does not walk people whatsoever. Struck out 86. A little disappointed to see that. Would like to see his strikeout rate be a little bit higher, considering he does have great control. But I'm not gonna knock it. I'll gladly take the 86 strikeouts when it comes with only 9 walks over 100 innings. Yeah, that's just incredible. A 3.21 ERA, 104 WHIP, and 13 quality starts. So again, George Kirby, a very deserving candidate. Part of the reason why I'm picking on him is just looking at the Seattle Mariners roster and talking with fellow Seattle Mariners fans. when Luis Castillo was named as a player, for me, there's the reaction of, really, that guy? Like, there wasn't like, oh yeah, deserving of, like, Castillo's deserving of it, but there wasn't, the whole Mariners team has kind of been a disappointment. There isn't a player on there that I can say is hands down the all-star candidate. Like Julio Rodriguez is another player who is an all-star, but I think it has a lot more to do with the fact of his name recognition, the fact that he's been labeled as the face of the MLB organization, and that's kind of why he's in there. I don't think his stats back up his candidacy for being an all-star, and same thing kind of with Castillo and with George Kirby. Like, those are all guys that are having, Castillo and Kirby having, good years, but not necessarily like all-star level years, in my opinion. Like, granted, there has to be one representative from each team. I would have pegged Julio being the one representative because of what I said, being the face of MLB. But Mariners got three. They've got Castillo, they've got George Kirby, and they've got Julio Rodriguez. The player I would replace George Kirby with is Joe Ryan for the Minnesota Twins. He's logged 102.2 innings. He's won 8 games, has a complete game shutout as well. So going to do one better than Mr. George Kirby. Giving up 14 home runs, only walked 16, which is also nice. Not George Kirby level, but 16 walks is not terrible. Struck out 114 batters, a 3.42 ERA, a .98 WHIP. This dude does not give up a lot of hits, doesn't give up a whole lot of walks, as we talked about as well. And he's been going pretty deep. He's delivering on a lot of hype that was put on him when he was coming up through the Tampa Bay Rays farm system. He was obviously a big player that was traded from Tampa Bay to Minnesota. So he's making do on all that hype, and he's looking really good for the Twins. He's got 12 quality starts on the season as well. So again, in comparing the stats between Kirby and Joe Ryan, you can make a strong case for either one being deserving of it. Obviously, Kirby got the nod. For me, it would be Joe Ryan. But moving over to my AL hitters, kind of hinted at this multiple times already, so it's no surprise. But Julio Rodriguez is the man who, again, I'm glad he's in the Derby. I think that's all he should be in terms of the All-Star break. He just hasn't had Julio Rodriguez level productivity this season. And I mean, at least it's hard to really say what his productivity is, considering he only has 1 year in the major leagues, and this is his second season. But we saw last year he had got off to a very, very slow start. Then obviously everything clicked, and he finished up having a phenomenal season. Was a huge, huge factor in why the Mariners broke their playoff drought. But this year, in 347 at-bats, he's only scored 50 runs, got 87 hits, 17 doubles, 1 triple, 13 home runs, 47 RBIs, 20 stolen bases, 27 walks, 96 strikeouts, 1 error, a 251 average, and a 730 OPS. Again, not anything what we saw last year, especially when it comes to the average. Stolen bases, he's still doing his thing on the base path. Home runs aren't quite at the level that they were last year, but he's still hitting them. And the biggest thing is just he leads Major League Baseball in outs made. And that is a huge reason as to why the Mariners are struggling offensively, and as to why he is struggling offensively as well. He's the league, MLB's leader with 275 outs made. And that's, it's kind of crazy that that person is going to be an all-star. We'll see how many outs he makes in the All-Star game. But yeah, again, I wouldn't pick him on there. The player that I would pick, and he'd actually also be a replacement for the Oakland A's representative, which is Brent Rooker, a former Twins prospect who is now with Oakland, having a great season, is Esteury Ruiz, who leads the Major League Baseball in stolen bases. He's having it's his rookie year, so he's having a good year. But it's Oakland. You need a team from there to be representative, and he's a guy. The question is, do you want Rooker or do you want Ruiz, the stolen base leader, versus a guy who's having a breakout season after having a few years in the majors? Again, I would take Ruiz. He's batting 257, which is, again, comparable to Julio Rodriguez, a 639 OPS, which is obviously lower, but his game is not home runs. His game is stolen bases, and he has 43 of those on the year. He's also got one homer, one triple. Again, no surprise that he's got a lot of extra base hits because of his speed. It is a little bit surprising he's only got one triple considering he's stolen 43 bases, but I would not be surprised over the course of his career if he is one of the league leaders in triples, just because that speed. You can see it with with players who have great speed. A ball in the gap is a double for a lot of players, but with guys with great speed, it's triples. Just because they can fly around the bases. He's got 19 doubles on the year, 86 hits, 33 runs, 35 RBIs batted in, and again, the runs, the RBIs, a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is just not a lot of offensive firepower or players in Oakland that are going to help drive up those numbers. So, not surprising that they're low there, but again, Ruiz would be my replacement over Julio Rodriguez for the AL replacement level players. Moving over to the NL, again, like I said, it was difficult. I mean, looking at the NL roster, there's just not a lot of guys that I can look at and point to and say, this is the guy that should be over. I mean, maybe Elias Diaz, but then again, who else in Colorado is going to be representing the Rockies? Chris Bryant, no. Charlie Blackmon, no. Nolan Jones, it looks like he could be a player for them and a good piece, but I don't think he's had enough at bats. I'm not a big fan of when guys are called up and they make the All-Star when they've had less playing time in the majors compared to other players. Maybe that's a little old school, but that's part of the reason why I'd hold him out. Ezequiel Tovar is a guy that they have a lot of hopes for. He seems to be turning it around offensively, which is nice. He should be a nice weapon for them offensively for the rest of this year and moving forward. But again, there's not a lot of guys in Colorado that you can point to and say, yeah, he should be the player over Diaz. So, we left Diaz in there, and we kind of looked at players or multiple players from one team. So obviously Atlanta is a nomination, but Matt Olson, Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, all deserving of it. Not somebody that can really look at and say, I'm going to be critical here and say you're not deserving of it. So for the pitchers, I ended up going with the Chicago Cubs' Justin Steele. Maybe you would prefer Marcus Stroman, his teammate there. I think Stroman's having a very good year. I picked Steele. Again, maybe I made the wrong choice here, but for me, it's Steele over Stroman, and really, it's he's having a fantastic season. Again, we're not going to take anything away from these players. He's logged 91 and a third innings, won 9 games, which is very nice, especially since the Cubs are not a great team this year. 11 quality starts, only given up 4 home runs, walked 19 batters, struck out 81, a 2.56 ERA, and a 1.06 WHIP. So again, looks good on paper. I think the Cubs have found something there. I think he's eventually going to be more of a back end of the rotation type of pitcher. I think his ceiling is somewhere in the middle of the rotation. We'll see what he can do. We'll see if he gets better as the season goes on in his career. But for me, it would be Justin Steele is a guy who should be removed and replaced by Miami's Jesus Luzardo. Logged 103 innings, won 7 games, given up 11 home runs, walked 26, struck out 120 batters, a 3.32 ERA, and a 1.16 WHIP, 10 quality starts. Again, I would take Luzardo over Steele, even though Steele has some better numbers in a majority of those listed categories. But, Luzardo is the former top prospect of Oakland who was traded to Miami. He seems to have found much more success in Miami than he did in Oakland. And it's looking like he could be a guy that maybe he's not a front of the rotation type of pitcher that was kind of expected of him, but I think he's the guy that is going to be a number 2, worst case like a number 3 in some really strong pitching rotations. I think if you have him anywhere lower than 3 in your rotation, you should be a World Series contender every year. This dude is going to be much better than I mean, he'd be the best number 4 and number 5 starter in rotation. But again, who are the 4 or 5 guys that you're going to have ahead of him? So I like Luzardo over Steele. And then moving over to the hitters, we're going to stick in Miami. We're going to stick with Jorge Soler. He's having a good year, and it's just kind of hypocritical for me because like I didn't want to necessarily like replace guys with other guys from the same team. Like I didn't want to necessarily have multiple players from Miami, but at the same time, like they've got a lot of good candidates in there for it. Jorge Soler is obviously already listed. Again, he's having a good year, especially by his standards. We know him as to be a guy who's going to hit the ball for home runs, but he's also going to strike out a lot. And this year, he's kind of cut down on it. He's got 51 runs scored, 77 hits, 18 doubles, 22 home runs. Again, no surprising there in that category. 49 RBIs, very lacking in that department. But again, when you look at Miami's roster, it's not surprising. I mean, name me another hitter outside of Luis Arraez that you can count on getting on base in front of Soler on a consistent level. And there's not really a lot of guys you can count on. So we'll see. Jazz Chisholm is out. When he comes back and he's healthy, we'll see how much he can be productive-wise and getting those RBIs up for Soler. 1 stolen base for Soler, 42 walks, and 79 strikeouts. Again, pretty good for Soler. Again, when we think of him, we think of home run, strikeout as pretty much the only 2 outcomes for him. 252 average and an 874 OPS. So again, this guy is having a good season, arguably the best season of his career. We'll see if he can keep it up over the entire course of this year. But for me, my replacement for him would be Ketel Marte, former Mariners prospect who's also traded to Arizona, and now he's having a great season with them. 61 runs scored, 87 hits, 13 doubles, 4 triples, 15 home runs, 44 RBIs, 6 stolen bases, 35 walks, 57 strikeouts, 4 errors, 284 average, and 864 OPS. So he definitely had a bounce back year from last year where there's a lot of expectations for him and he didn't live up to it. He's coming through again this season on it and being a key factor for the surprising Arizona Diamondbacks. He's batting near the top of the order. He's been playing a really good second base for them this season. The Diamondbacks have him as their starting second baseman. Not seen much time, if at all, in the outfield, and why would you? The Diamondbacks have a very loaded outfield, so they really don't need him out there. But he's been great at the keynote for them, or at the keystone for the Diamondbacks. And for me, I would take him over Ketel Marte or Jorge Soler. Part of it is just because he adds a little bit of a different dimension to the baseball game for the NL roster. He's going to be a little more on the hits side versus the home run side. And when you look at the NL roster, you've got a lot of guys who can offer up a lot of power. And Sean Murphy, Nolan Arenado, Freddie Freeman, Acuna, Betts, Corbin Carroll, J.D. Martinez for the starters. And then offensively coming off the bench, you've got Will Smith, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Pete Alonso. So yeah, I mean, yeah, those guys are your big time home run hitters that you think about, often. I get that Albies would be or that Marte would be redundant, considering you have Arcia as a shortstop who can also play second. You got Arraez who can play second, and then you also have Albies on the roster who plays second base as well. So it'd be a lot of guys who play the same position. Granted, Arraez can also slide over and play some first, so there would be some roster flexibility there. In outfield, you've got Acuna, Betts, Carroll. Then you've got Lourdes Gurriel, Nick Castellanos, Juan Soto. So Jorge Soler is your DH. You probably won't see him in the outfield at all in the All-Star game. He will most likely just replace J.D. Martinez, who's a starting DH. But again, for me, I'm taking Marte over Soler. I think Marte is deserving of it a little bit more than Soler is. But again, you can't go wrong with the players who are already picked in there. I think there's a strong case made by me for why Marte should be the guy over Soler. But again, let us know in the comments, let us know on Twitter why I'm wrong or why I'm right. I'm fully expecting to get more why I'm wrong and out of my mind type of comments from you guys. But please let us know what you think on not just this episode, but also on the All-Star game. Share with us who you think is going to be winning the Home Run Derby, who's going to win the All-Star game itself. Share with us who you think might be the MVP. I'm not going to make a prediction on that. It's kind of a cop-out. I admit it. There's just so many players on there that you could, who knows? It could be a starter from, the team. It could be someone off the bench. Yeah, we'll see. I'm not making a selection. Maybe as the game gets going, I might tweet out who I think is deserving of it, or maybe I'll start a poll and we'll see who wants to chime in as to who's worthy of being the All-Star MVP. But you guys, thank you so much for listening to us, following us. We really appreciate it. Again, like we say all the time, tell your friends about us, the Replacement Level Podcast. We are here. We are not going anywhere. We're going to continue to give you quality, superb MLB content here. Share with us on Twitter. Share with us on any of your social media platforms. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, any other places that you can listen to your podcast. We're there. YouTube, give us a follow, give us a like, share on social media, share with your friends. Tell everybody that you know about us, and thank you again. Until next week, have a great time enjoying the All-Star game. I know I will, and we will see you all next week.